Edition of the Ad Podcast for you guys today. A very fun guest for you today. Dana Light is a seasoned marketing executive and the current CMO of RIZZ, where she leads the company's strategic marketing, research, and brand initiatives to grow visibility and customer engagement. She brings deep experience in data-driven marketing, research, and brand development from previous roles, including Director of Marketing and Research at Way Capital and VP of Marketing and Research at George Smith Partners. Dana's career spans a range of industries where she's focused on turning insights into impactful growth strategies and elevate marketing presence through smart, measurable campaigns. And today she's going to tell us about what she's building at RIZZ and how she is helping brands grow their presence in the commercial real estate industry. Dana, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to chat with you.
Yeah, let's go. So let's start off with a little bit of an origin story. So where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? And how'd you get into the industry?
I am born and raised in Beverly Hills. Went to school at University Pacific, where I was a marketing major. And just got into marketing. First job out of college, I was in marketing for an envelope factory.
A lot of people way. That's cool. It's always fun when you started in something that's kind of obscure and interesting. So, okay. So, what were some of the salient points as you kind of made your way up to launching your own platform? And then we'll get into what RIZZ is and what you're building.
So I spent 5 years at George Smith Partners as the director of marketing, where I was working with mortgage brokers and I built relationships in the capital markets. And I got the opportunity to do PR, to do a lot of events and conferences. And one of the things that really stood out to me is the opportunity for biz dev, especially tying to events and conferences. So I saw that companies were spending a lot of money on sponsoring an event, but a mortgage broker needs to focus on getting the deal across the finish line. And after, these guys would come back from a conference, they'd put a stack of business cards on their desk and they were focused on the deal and their teams were focused on the deals, but there wasn't always, great follow-up. And there wasn't a measurable ROI after the conferences and events. So that's where I felt I could add the most value. And it was also a niche for my business when I started as well.
I love that. It's interesting. I worked for a guy who literally wrote the book on networking before LinkedIn and all that stuff, a guy named Keith Ferrazzi, who wrote a book called Never Eat Alone. And one of the concepts that he teaches in that book is something that's always stuck with me, and it's follow up or fail, right? So one of the things that I try to do, whether I'm at a conference or even just in meetings, is follow up quickly. The longer you wait for a follow up, the more time goes by between you've had a conversation with somebody. And if you let a week go by or even a couple of days or a couple of hours, it's time is money, essentially. And each moment that you wait to follow up is you lower the chances that you're actually going to get a successful outcome. And I think it's crazy, right? It's like, it's almost insane that people drop these budgets to either be a speaker or sponsor or do something at a conference. And then they go to this conference and they collect all these leads and then they don't do anything with them. I mean, it's almost baffling that is something that can happen. But you're right. Like when you're dealing with professional services industries, especially with the principals of an architecture firm or a law firm or some kind of professional services, sometimes these guys are really good at the transaction, but they're not so good at the process. So I really love what you're doing. It's one of the reasons I spend every other week out in the field at an event. And it's also one of the reasons why I made this podcast a live podcast, because literally as soon as we turn the camera off, this podcast will already be out in the world. It'll be on all my social channels, and within an hour, it'll be on Spotify. So I love the concept, and I think it's great.
Before we move on, there's just
let's go.
One little tidbit to add, and Perfect. That is that a lot of work goes in prior to the event. So RIZZ and my company were hired to help companies with their biz dev. And prior to the event, scraping the attendee list and figuring out
Mm,
who their prospects are, because a lot of these conferences are huge. I mean, 2,000, 2,500 people. And how do you get in front of the decision makers that you're trying to get in front of? And oftentimes you go to the events and you talk to your friends or you talk to people you know, when you really need to be, very diligent about your time there and making sure that you're getting in front of the right people. So a lot of what my team and I do prior to the event is figuring out who the prospects are and reaching out to them on LinkedIn, reaching out to them directly, phone calls, emails, getting that meeting, getting it locked and loaded. I attend the meeting with my client while they're engaging. I'm taking notes and then I'm helping with the follow up, making sure they remember after you have 2 or 3 days out of the office and you've talked to dozens of people. It's hard to remember who does what and who said what. So making sure that the follow up is very specific to what the conversation had. If there was something that was mentioned that goes in the follow up, that I make sure that happens.
I love that. That's such a great point too. That's another Keith Ferrazzi conference commando. Key point of differentiation is that like you got to have a game plan. And really, one of the things that I'm really bad at is like Monday night or Sunday morning, I'll go on and look at, different places to find events and I'll plan for that week. But really, you need to be 3 to 6 weeks out. And when you're planning an execution strategy, or you're kind of dropping the ball. And to your point, you don't want to let this investment you've made in physical time of showing up to the event or the fact that you're spending money on sponsoring, you don't want to leave that up to chance. So scraping the contacts from the speaker page. Have you heard of a tool called Vendalux?
I have not.
Oh my gosh, you're going to die. So you got to go get a demo of Vendalux, like literally when we get off this podcast. I just onboarded them for one of my clients. So they have every conference in the entire world. They scrape data, but they also have relationships with the conference planners. So not only do you have speaker details, but you have attendee details and sponsor details. And they do meeting bookings as a service for $100 a meeting. And you can, those are the best parts, but check it out because I think it would add like a whole data layer to like what you're doing that would be really great for you to be able to pass on to clients. I think you also mentioned something else that I think is more of like a mindset and a behavior that people really have to think about when they get into their event planning strategy or their event execution strategy. I'll give you an example. I went to Cannes a few years ago with no planning. I just showed up. I paid $4,500 to show up. I hadn't planned at all. I downloaded the app. That was basically it. And the problem is I started flipping through the people on the app and I was like, oh, I know that guy. And then I text him and he's like, yeah, come over to this yacht party. And now it's fun, but I'm just going to parties and hanging out with my friends. Like that doesn't generate business results. So by the third day, I had to make a rule that I'm not going to reach out to anybody I already know. I'm not going to hang out with my friends. I'm going to go on the app. I'm going to go to interesting panels and I'm going to go and try and meet new people. And I'm not going to hang out with any of my friends. And those last 3 days were way more productive than the first 2 days that I was hanging out with my friends. So why is it important for executives to tune their mind and like be disciplined about not just hanging out with people they already know and figuring out a way to like go and meet the people that actually matter?
Well, that's why they're there
Yeah.
is, to get the new business. And I really believe that, in this day and age, it's so competitive that people work with people they like and they want to look you in the eyes and they'll click with you or they won't. And not everybody's going to click with you, but if they like you and they trust you and you get off on the right foot, then that's the start. But it's also not always just meeting somebody at a conference and then it turning into a deal. I mean, that's just the start of the marketing funnel, or it's one of many touches that you want to make with that person. So maybe at that conference, maybe they've seen you on LinkedIn, maybe they've seen your newsletter, maybe they've seen you around the conference. It's just another impression that you're making on the person. And it might not be a deal at that time when you leave the conference, but it's making sure that person's in your database for your newsletter. Are you connecting with that person on LinkedIn? Like, it's just continuing the process. And sometimes it's a slow drip, more than not. It's slow. And that's something that people and clients need to understand, that it's not always after this event, I could guarantee you're going to have new business. I'll do my best, but that's usually, not how it works. You don't get,
Yeah.
a deal usually right off the bat.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people go into event marketing and they think it's like, like a guarantee. Like, I just went to this conference called Focusrite, and I don't know, somebody scanned my badge. I'm on this list for this big data company. I want to embarrass them and, name them. But I keep getting like these follow-ups from like a sales rep of like, here's exactly what we do and what we want to sell you. And it's like, first of all, I'm a sales guy. Like, I'm the wrong guy to be talking to. So it's like, I'm just in their system, get the newsletter. I don't mind. It's actually more the outreach from the sales rep, like totally not looking me up on LinkedIn, not seeing that I'm like totally not the right person. I think if he would have approached me and been like, hey, like, I saw you met us at Focusrite and I see you're in sales and you're probably not the right person to talk about this opportunity, but we're so glad to have met you. Here's what we do. Is there somebody on your team that you can introduce us to? I would probably forward that on, but instead it's like they're just coming at me for like the sale. And I think you're right. Like, events are exactly what you mentioned. They're an impression, right? They're like an impression, seeing a banner or seeing a video ad on the internet or getting exposed to a person's white paper. It's just one of many multiple marketing touch points. But I don't go to any events and bring my computer with me and try and do sales pitches and demos. I try to shake hands, meet people, build relationships, and then follow up. Why do you think companies and sales teams are, so hell bent on kind of the ROI conversation, and they're not willing to like really think about like what it takes to execute an event strategy that actually nurtures relationships into long-term opportunities?
Well, when a company's spending so much money, they want to see an ROI. And that's my reason why somebody should hire RIZZ and hire me to go to these events, because what I am doing, I am showing an analytical report after the event saying, you know, because of me, you got X number of meetings, you got, X number of business cards we collected at the booth, or, we had outreach to 100 people. We only had 20 meetings, but we still now, after the conference, have 5 phone calls. This person was sick, but we're going to, schedule a meeting. They're going to be in California at this time. So there's a lot of follow up after the meeting for not everybody that you are able to meet, but everything is measurable. And I think
Mm.
that's where the ROI comes in when you do it right.
What is your opinion on like drafting off an event? So like kind of building your own event within the event, like a cocktail party or a dinner or like some kind of like a bolt on. Do you think that is a good strategy, or do you think that's hard to execute because people are already getting pulled in a lot of directions? What are your thoughts on like shoulder events?
Well, I personally have been involved with events through, previous companies where they did just that, and it was very successful. One of the things that I want to mention is sometimes your competitors show up at your parties, and
Mm.
that is a whole conversation. And I worked for a private money lender called RIZZ Capital, and the CEO was very good friends with a competitor, and he was very adamant about saying to me, your competitor doesn't really have to be somebody that you're threatened by. Having
Mm.
these good relationships with your competitors, they could, be bringing you business that they can't do. They're a phone call when you have a problem. It's like those, when you reach a certain point in your career, you don't always need to look at your competitors as a threat. So, throwing these big parties, you never know who's a second degree separation person who's going to like you, recommend you, refer you. And sometimes it just opens the floodgates. So I think that it's a great idea to do it because it's your target audience. You're, in this um, environment where you want to get in front of as many people as possible. So I think it's great. I like the idea of doing small dinners. I like the idea if you have a budget to do a big party. And I just think it's important that you make sure you get the names and the emails of who's coming, and having somebody look at the list after and kind of going through it and making sure that you're following up with those people, because they should be open to a call if they went to your party. They should be open to meeting if they went to your party.
That's a good point. I think there's a certain amount of like obligation or value exchange. Like if you're providing, a good opportunity, like you should at least, if you're a halfway decent person, you should pay it back, right? I think another component is that you were talking about is like this other mindset shift that I think sometimes clients need to go through, which is like the world is not a zero sum game. It's actually like a world of like endless opportunity. And I shouldn't look at the like I just talked to the chief brand officer of Tractor Beverage on the podcast the other day, and like it's hard to use Nike in the example of like B2B marketing or like event marketing, but I think he said something really important, which was at Nike they didn't really think of their competitors. They didn't care about them. They didn't spend any time thinking about them. They didn't give them any mind share. They just focused on making Nike great and servicing their customer and helping inspire athletes to do better. And I think, when you have a mindset, when you're focused on like, got to get mine, if I don't get mine, or if somebody else gets something, that means I'm not getting something, like that mindset actually keeps you small, right? So I love that idea of like, hey, like your competitors could be referral partners. They might end up being, I mean, who knows? Maybe you guys will buy each other at some point, or one company buys the other.
Right.
It's important. It's important to know who your competitors are, and have good relationships.
Absolutely.
I love that. So let's talk about event marketing as just kind of like a larger concept. So, I've been going out and going to events every other week for one reason. I spend a week on, week off because I need a week to like follow up and catch up. And then I go back out into the field to generate more leads. But for me, like with the podcast, I'm actually doing it because I want an interesting backdrop for content and I want to like create cool B-roll. But in the age of like AI spam bots and LinkedIn spam bots and email, like everybody's inbox is exploding with stuff they don't need. Why do you think it's important just in general for people to get out into the real world and try and meet customers or prospects where they are at conferences and at events, more as like a larger macro viewpoint?
Well, I think getting in front of people and having, just real conversations and trying to understand what people's pain points are. And, sometimes when you're having a conversation, that does come out where, nobody wants to be spammed. Nobody wants, gazillion texts that come from AI. And I think that that's super important to differentiate the importance of, avoiding that at all costs and not going that route. And I definitely think it's quality over quantity. I would much
Mm,
rather provide a client with 10 quality leads and quality people versus throwing a wider net to 1,000 people and hoping that by touching so many, people that you have a different result, when I don't think in my space that that's the answer.
yeah, I love that. Can you talk about how AI is making your process this is the year that I'm trying to ask guests about practical use cases of AI. There was a lot of hype around AI in the last year, and now it's like, let's get down to brass tacks and like really talk about how to use it. So I feel like AI enhances the event space quite a bit. I'm using it a lot, but would love to hear about how you are using AI to accelerate your process, both on the front end and the back end of events.
So I use AI more on the communication. So if I write an email, I'll have them improve my grammar or make it sound different or better. But I'll never advocate for using AI to outsource social media or outreach altogether, because that human element is so obviously lost in AI. It just is not there yet from what I've seen. And if anything, it turns me away from whomever that company is who just is, blasting AI messages. And these DMs through LinkedIn that aren't real people, you see. And LinkedIn posts that are AI made, it's horrible, and it's so obvious when I see it that this isn't a person who's writing it because of the way it's written, because humans don't communicate the way the computers are and the AI is putting out content. And to me, I think it works negatively and could harness your brand. And it really is upsetting to me when I see it. When I see, clients say, "Well, I could just do it myself," and they think that that's okay. I mean, I just think that it's much worse.
Yeah, they call that AI slop, I think, right? When you see like just poorly constructed AI messaging, either as a LinkedIn comment or a post or a piece of it just like, I guess it gives an opportunity for real marketers to punch through if everything else is like AI slop and spammy. So I'll tell you a couple things that I'm doing with AI on the event side. One, I actually use it before I had Vendalux, which is a $20,000 a year tool. I was actually using chat pretty much exclusively to find what conferences to go to. So every Sunday night, I would go into chat, and for different clients, I would say, what travel conferences are this week? Or what consumer insights conferences are this week? Or what apparel industry conferences are this week, et cetera. And chat does a pretty good job of like curating both like the big conferences and some of the smaller, more niche ones. Or you could say, which ones are in Southern California or which ones are in San Diego if you want to stay local. So I do feel like chat is a great kind of event discovery platform now, both big and small. And then the other part I'm using it is to curate my schedule for like large events. So for instance, CES, it's, miles and miles of square footage. It's 200,000 people are going to be there. So for these big events where you could never walk the entire floor in, even if you had like a month, you could probably not walk and look and see everything that happens at CES. A great thing to do is to go into these platforms and say, ChatGPT, can you curate a itinerary for me for CES through the lens of a travel marketer or a apparel marketer or blah, blah, blah. So then it'll go through and say like, oh, well, you should go to this panel and you should go to this area of the showroom floor and look at the connected city stuff. And then you should go to this keynote on the other end of town. So it takes like a massive conference like CES that's very like broad and kind of like you could get lost in, and it kind of hones it down and creates a schedule that is relevant just to you and your ICP. So I found that those are kind of two ways that I've found it to be very effective for like event marketing.
It's amazing.
Love it. All right. How do you kind of measure like you're talking about the data piece and data collection both on the front end and the back end. Have you solved for attribution? Like, because you talked about like maybe the event is the first touch point, but then the customer doesn't become pipeline until 9 months later, and then the deal closes in 6 months. How do you get pipeline attribution, and how do you as a marketer get credit for that sale that happens from an event, a year later?
Well, I don't know if I ever do get credit because the client will say, "Well, I knew them from before." I think I play in the commercial real estate space, and it gets real small real quick. I mean, everybody seems to know everybody once you've been around long enough. And depending on the client, they're focused in, a different type of asset class, maybe multiple asset classes. I work with mortgage brokers. They're trying to find capital oftentimes, and they're trying to find sponsors. And then I also work for lenders, and they want to get in front of mortgage brokers. So a lot of the relationships are crossing over. So it's just, figuring out, because there are so many conferences and events, you could make a whole career out of just going to events and conferences. It's figuring out which events are going to try and get you, the biggest return. Where if you're trying to find a sponsor, maybe they're not at the commercial events where everybody else is, and it's really saturated with other mortgage brokers. So trying to figure out, where are those smaller events, or where are those owner operators, developers hanging out. So I think that it's a little bit of a puzzle, trying to
Yeah,
get to, for the client, get to their target audience and figure out what conference or event is right for them.
yeah, I love that. The complexity of the commercial real estate industry was always fascinating to me because, you have the ecosystem, right? So you have all these different types of people that are marketing to the commercial real estate industry, whether that's capital, tools, software, property management services, professional services. So, but then you have the idea that like each of these commercial real estate brokers needs to kind of build their own personal brand and their own vertical expertise. Like I always notice that the commercial real estate brokers that seem to be the most successful were usually one of two kinds. It was one who had gotten like, kind of the same way that residential real estate agents get really good. They focus on an area like the port of San Pedro, and they get really good at understanding all the players in that ecosystem, and they get 30 years of experience. And like you said, they just become like the name, and nobody would ever think about going to anybody except them because they're on every board in town, and they just become like the guy or gal that locks up that little area. But then the other thing that I would notice is that there were these commercial real estate brokers that became vertical experts, where they like only helped life sciences companies around the country, or they only helped nonprofits and churches, or they only helped public school institutions acquire more real estate. So do you help like the individual brokers? Because like that seems like an interesting strategy too, because those brokers need to find conferences that aren't necessarily like within the commercial real estate industry, and they need to be able to go and do the same thing, but they need to go to the conferences where their clients are, such as retail or life sciences or gas stations or whatever the thing may be.
Right. So when you talk about brokers, there's investment sales brokers who are selling and buying the buildings. And I worked at Marcus Millichap, and I did marketing and understand exactly what you're saying by focusing on a certain area. I think that if an investment sales broker sold a building in a certain area, it helps him to get the next listing. It helps for a mortgage broker who financed a hospitality deal to do another hospitality deal, because somebody sees that he did it or she did it, and that business should be easier to get the second time around. And that's the idea of trying to market your wins and to make sure everybody knows when you do have successes, because that makes you more interesting to the potential client, knowing that they might have something that is similar, therefore they would want to work with you.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do you think, brokers that are just kind of getting their teeth cut and are getting into the industry and are trying to figure out like where is their place in the world, do you think they should start off kind of as generalists and just like try a lot of things and then kind of see where they have success and then start to specialize? Or should they start to think about their specialization even before that, so that way they can get that first deal in the specialization that there is? It like what's first, the cart or the
As a
horse?
catch-22. So a lot of mortgage brokers that I've worked with, they like to call themselves generalists because they don't want to turn down any opportunity to finance anything, because they have these relationships with the capital markets. But having said that, I do think certain mortgage brokers who have a track record in a particular asset class tend to do well when they, stick to that asset class.
That's interesting. And then another component that I think is typical of the commercial industry is like this idea of centers of influence, right? Where like there are these other professions that handle other parts of the sequence of events that can become really great referral partners if you can build those relationships and activate them. How much do you think about that in the context of the larger commercial real estate marketing ecosystem, but also like, in what you do in the event strategy? Because I imagine these folks are probably like, if they all have the same target, but they all play in different parts of the transaction, you could almost represent a portfolio of companies going into some of these events and you could represent somebody in each component of the sequence versus just one part of the pie.
So there's two parts to that answer. And the first part is that having that second degree separation, for example, an architect or an accountant or somebody who's dealing with not your direct target, but like you said, a center of influence, 100%. It's very, very important. And those relationships are very solid because it all overlaps and you just never know when somebody's going to need something. And then the second thing I want to mention is my client roster. What I've done is I've gotten an environmental engineer, I've gotten, mortgage brokers, I've gotten lenders, I've gotten all these different attorneys, all these different service providers within the commercial real estate space. So hopefully my clients can overlap with each other. And when I'm sitting down with a lender, I might hear that they have an environmental problem. And I say, I get this guy and, he's on speed dial. Let me get him on the phone right now for you. Or, somebody who's doing a loan workout. There's just a lot to be said for those people who are those influencers or the second degree separation, third degree separation, because they oftentimes come back and refer people. So working with like a tax assessment company, they might say, hey, I know somebody who needs a loan workout. It just and then it goes back to investment sales and to financing. I mean, it's all intertwined. So I think it's helpful to have clients who represent a lot of different players in the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can almost kind of monetize each component of the transaction, and you can have like a secret, like anybody that comes into the network then becomes a referral partner for the rest of the network in a way.
Exactly.
I love it. Well, super exciting, Dana. I've always enjoyed the brief moments in which I get to parachute into the commercial real estate industry and go to fun events. Like I remember I used to go to the Jones Lang LaSalle event that they used to do downtown LA once a year and do like the economic State of the Union in Los Angeles, or when Keith Ferrazzi, my old boss, keynoted the CB Richard Ellis Global Conference. I've always had a fascination for the commercial real estate industry and, how things get done in that space. So it was fun to kind of take a little bit of a trip down memory lane with you. If there are folks who are watching the show and are interested in either servicing the commercial real estate industry or applying some of the principles and the ideas that we talked about today, where would you like to send people to learn more about your company or connect with you directly?
Absolutely. My website is RIZZ, RIZZCRE.com. And my email is dlight@rizzcre.com.
I love it. Well, for those of you who are watching at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a like or a subscribe. And if you are listening to the show, if you give us a honest rating on whatever podcast platform you happen to be listening on, that's how we find a larger audience organically. And last but not least, if there is a commercial real estate professional or somebody in the professional services industry who wants to get exposure to this part of the world, or if there's just somebody who needs to buck up on their event strategy chops and wants to learn about some interesting concepts that we've talked about today, about how I do this in the marketing and advertising world and how Dana does this in the commercial real estate space, don't forget to share the show. And with that, Dana, I will thank you for coming on and sharing your insights with the audience. I wish you a happy holidays.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.